184th year since the conquest of Aegon the Conqueror, King Aegon IV, known as Aegon the Unworthy to the history books, perhaps one of the worst and most damaging kings Westeros ever saw, finally let go of life, leaving behind him a dark storm in his wake that would consume and divide Westeros. In a way, King Aegon IV would do more damage to the realm in his death than he ever did in life, which, given all the misrule that occurred during his reign, is staggering. In truth, no one wept for the king, as most had grown to dislike and despise the man, from the most noble of lords to the most humble of small folk. In truth, most of his family and children, both trueborn and base, had no love for their father, none more so than his only trueborn son and heir, Prince Daeron, who was greatly disliked by his father, who is rumoured to be the source of the claims that Daeron was in fact the son of Aemon the Dragon Knight. Prince Daeron departed Dragonstone within a fortnight of learning of his father's death and was swiftly crowned by the High Septon in the Red Keep. A surprise to some, Daeron chose to wear his father's crown, with some at court feeling it would be best to distance Daeron from his father, but it is speculated that Daeron chose to don his father's crown to quell any of the remaining doubts about his legitimacy. While in truth there was no way to prove or disprove the rumours, there would always be those at court and further afield who would use the suggestion of illegitimacy to further their own means. While Daeron could never permanently remove the stain on his reputation, most paid it no mind, and the symbolism of him wearing Aegon IV's crown did help to quell any doubters somewhat. But despite it all, he would be missing arguably the most important symbol of the Targaryen dynasty, other than the now dead dragons. The Sword of Kings, the Sword of the Conqueror, Blackfyre, which had been given to his younger bastard half-brother, Daemon Waters, now Daemon Blackfyre. The thing is, Daemon was not just another one of King Aegon IV's bastards, as even among the great bastards he was different and stood apart, as while he was illegitimate, both his parents were true-born Targaryens, King Aegon IV and Princess Daena. The lack of Daeron holding the Sword of Kings would be a key factor pushed by his enemies. As soon as he was crowned and took the Iron Throne, King Daeron II acted swiftly to put right many of the things that Aegon IV had put wrong, and there was much that needed to be fixed. He started by removing all the members of the Small Council, which for many at court was unprecedented and an affront to the honour of those men. But to Daeron, these were the very men who facilitated and allowed his father's misrule, and removing them would be sending a clear message to the nobles and small folk alike, replacing them with men of his own choosing, most of whom proved wise and capable counsellors. It sent a message to the realm that he was not his father, and he was worthy of his crown, and would work to right the wrongs of the rule of Aegon. While replacing the small council was a vital move for Daeron, and a good start, there was much to be done, and not long to do it. It was a year or more before the City Watch King's Landing was too repaired and brought back to respectable standing, being a force for good, rather than brutality and corruption. King Aegon IV had often used promotion to the City Watch as a way to shower rewards on those he most favoured, and they in turn made sure that the brothels and even the decent women of the city were available for Aegon's lusts. Given the ingrained culture of the Goldcloaks over Aegon's rule, it was a slow process finding the correct men to fill the command roles, which proved a challenge, as among the members of the Watch there was few suitable men. But over time, changes were made, and the reputation of the Goldcloaks was restored somewhat. But Daeron did not stop there. In his efforts to improve those things his father had corrupted, or had left to rot through malign neglect, he was conscientious in his duties to the realm, and sought to stabilise it in the wake of Aegon's deathbed decree, which legitimised all of his bastard half-siblings. And given the number of them, this would perhaps prove to be the hardest of his tasks during his early rule. While there was some suggestion to rescind his father's last wishes, in truth, King Daeron legally could not do so, even if he wanted to. So, he did what he could to keep the great bastards close, treating them honourably, and even becoming close to some of them, continuing their incomes that the king had bestowed upon them. He also agreed to pay the dowry that Aegon had promised the Archon of Tyrosh, thereby seeing his half-brother, Daemon Blackfyre, wed to Rowan of Tyrosh, as Aegon had desired. For all of that, Daemon was only 4 and 10. On their wedding day, he granted Daemon a tract of land near the Blackwater, with the right to raise a castle. Some say he did such things to assert his rule and legitimacy over the great bastards. Others because he was kind and just, and wanted to build a relationship with his half-siblings. But as history tells us, from what was about to come. Whatever the truth of King Daeron II's motivations, such efforts sadly proved in vain, and would bathe the realm in fire and blood once again. While the issue of fixing the damage of his father's misrule was of course the first priority for King Daeron Targaryen when he came to his throne at Aegon's death, other pressing issues such as the Great Bastards also took much of his focus. But they were not solely the focus of his time during the early days of his reign. Despite the scale of the task at hand, King Daeron found time for other important matters too. His marriage to Mariah of Dorne in the wake of his namesake's failed conquest in 161 AC had done much to improve relations between House Targaryen and Dorne. The marriage to the now Queen of the Seven Kingdoms had been happy and fruitful, and one of his early significant acts after assuming the throne was to begin negotiations with his brother-in-law, Prince Maron, to unify Dorne under Targaryen rule, something that had eluded every Targaryen king before him, with 4 large wars with Dorne as well as Daeron I's failed invasion, filling the pages of history with blood. It was never going to be an easy task, and one many of King Daeron's councillors felt was impossible. Even with his marriage to the Prince of Dorne's sister, there possessed a real risk that even if House Martell did agree to join the realm of House Targaryen, that it did not mean the great lords of Dorne would also agree with their prince's choice. It took 2 years of hard negotiations, but in the end, in 186 AC, an agreement was finally reached in which Prince Maron agreed to be betrothed to Daeron's younger sister, the then 14-year-old Princess Daenerys, once she came of age. Daenerys and Prince Maron were married the following year in 187 AC, and with that marriage, Prince Maron knelt and swore his oaths of fealty before the Iron Throne, and Dorne finally became part of the realm of House Targaryen. King Daeron II had done what no other king could, and brought the Dornish into the realm. It may have taken 187 years longer than Aegon the Conqueror had intended, but his dream of a united Westeros was finally achieved. For the first time in history, from the broken arm of Dorne in the south to the wall in the far north, Westeros was one realm, under one king. King Daeron II raised up the Dornish prince to great acclaim, and together they departed the Red Keep and rode through the streets of King's Landing to the great scepter Baelor to lay a golden wreath at the foot of the statue of Baelor the Blessed, while proclaiming, "Baelor, your work is done," which in many respects was true. While the young dragon, King Daeron I, instigated the invasion of Dorne, it was Baelor the Blessed who brought the peace that allowed Dorne to finally bend the knee. While Baelor would of course make many mistakes in his later rule, his acts and choices when it came to Dorne could be seen as a great achievement. It was truly a great moment, at last unifying the realm from the Wall to the Summer Sea, as Aegon the Conqueror had once dreamed, and doing so without the terrible cost of life that Daeron I, the young dragon, had paid many years before. In the following year, Daeron raised a great siege in the Dornish Marches, near where the borders of the Reach, the Stormlands and Dorne met, where many bloody battles between the 3 kingdoms had been fought since the Dawn Age of Westeros. He called it Summerhall, to mark the peace he had created. It was more of a palace in truth than a castle, lightly fortified at best, and probably could not stand to a siege. But what it represented was far more important. This lightly guarded palace on the border of the 3 kingdoms, once ravaged by war, stood as a symbol of the ongoing peace. In the years to come, many sons of House Targaryen would hold the seat as the Prince of Summerhall. In a way, Summerhall marked the final peace between the 3 kingdoms, and an end of 1,000 years of bloodshed. However, Prince Maron had won a few concessions in the Accords, concessions that many of the Lords of Westeros were not at all happy with. The Lords of Dorne held significant rights and privileges that the other great houses of Westeros did not. The right to keep their royal titles first amongst them, but also the autonomy to maintain their own laws, the right to assess and gather their own taxes due to the Iron Throne, with only irregular oversight from the Red Keep, and other such matters. Dissatisfaction at the concessions was one of the seeds from which the first Blackfyre rebellion sprang, as it was the belief that Dorne held too much influence over the king, for Daeron II brought many Dornishmen to his court, some of whom were granted offices of note. The huge achievement of King Daeron II Targaryen, bringing the Dornish under the control of House Targaryen, cannot be understated or overlooked, but there was a huge cost in terms of the opinion and mood of his own lords, especially in the Stormlands and the Reach, who have felt the accord with the Dornish Daeron had achieved was to the detriment and cost of his own people. More so, there was a fear of the growing power the Dornish held over the king. His wife was the sister to the Prince of Dorne. Princess Daenerys was married to Prince Maron, and the court at King's Landing had been filled with Dornish lords. More so, the king's children, and thus the heirs to the Targaryen throne, would also now be half Dornish, with familiar connections to Dorne through their mother and aunt. Thus, some lords rightly feared the growing power the Dornish now held beyond their borders. But despite these fears, perhaps unfounded fears, Westeros was united and at peace, and King Daeron II had done much to correct the wrongs of his father. But there was to be a sting in the tale, and its name was Daemon Blackfyre. With the power that hindsight grants us, the errors of the past seem obvious to those with the context of events to come, and that is true, none more so than with the Blackfyre rebellions and the rise of Daemon Blackfyre. It has been said that in the years after Daemon Blackfyre proved a traitor to some and a hero to others, that his deep-rooted and fierce hatred of his elder half-brother, King Daeron II, began to grow early, and with that hatred sent the realm on a path of war. In truth, it is claimed that it was his father, King Aegon IV, who desired that Daemon be wed to Rohanne of Tyrosh. The truth of the matter is that Daemon had no such desire to do so. Daemon was said to have developed a deep passion for his younger half-sister and the sister of King Daeron, the young Princess Daenerys. The princess was only 2 years younger than Daemon. There were those at court who claimed that the princess supposedly loved the bastard prince in turn, with the tale of it becoming a favourite of the singers. But much like many of the rumours of court, it's hard to truly know the validity of it. Perhaps there are more detailed court records of this era that will one day shed light on this. But until then, we must accept the evidence we have for what it is. But much like a lot of the supposed court rumours and scandals, there is often, at the very least, a grain of truth at the heart of it. Maybe, perhaps, in an ideal world, a marriage of true love between Daemon and Daenerys could have averted the wars to come, or perhaps only have made it worse, as Daemon Blackfyre, with a true-born Targaryen wife, whom was his half-sister, would arguably give his claim to the throne even more legitimacy. But at the time, very few could have predicted the events to come in the following years. The reality of the situation, whether Daemon loved his half-sister and she loved him or not, neither his father, King Aegon IV, nor his true-born half-brother, King Daeron II, were willing to let such feelings rule when it came to matters of state and politics. Like near every king before them, when it came to political matters, including marriages, they saw it as their duty to the realm to make the best matches and choices possible for their children in order to secure House Targaryen and, on the whole, benefit the Seven Kingdoms. Sometimes that means you marry a stranger from a foreign land, and in rare cases, you may be lucky to marry the woman you love. King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, the Old King, the Conciliator, encapsulated this perfectly. While his own marriage to his sister, the Good Queen Alysanne, was in truth a political move on his part, it was lucky for them both there was deep love between them. His son, Balon the Brave, loved his sister Alyssa, and they were too lucky enough to marry. But that's not the case with all of Jaehaerys' children, with many married off for political purposes. One of Jaehaerys' younger daughters showed the other side of this coin perfectly, in her reluctance to marry a man not of her choosing. As a result, Princess Visera Targaryen tragically lost her life. The lesson we can take from the old king and his children is whether marrying for love or for politics, the outcome is never certain, and the morality behind it is never black and white. In the case of Daemon Blackfyre, King Aegon IV and his small council saw more profit in a tie to Tyrosh, perhaps because his fleets would be of great use if King Aegon made another attempt to conquer Dorne, whereas a match between Daemon and Daenerys would have gained Aegon little to nothing. Daemon would be a good match for the Tyroshi, where maybe in the eyes of Aegon, Princess Daenerys was too valuable of a political pawn to waste on a bastard, even if that bastard happened to be his favourite, even among his true-born children. King Aegon IV may have been an unworthy and poor king, but he still bore some political sense. As with many of the issues surrounding King Daeron II and Daemon Blackfyre, it would not be that simple. Depending on what tales you believe, there exists one that seems plausible enough that adds an extra dimension to the marriage plans of Daemon Blackfyre. It is claimed by some sources that Daemon was not so much opposed to marrying Rohanna Tyrosh. In fact, he too saw the benefits of the match to his father, but also to himself in some regards, thanks to the power and position it would give him. The issue is, Daemon was a strong-willed man, and he was, throughout his life, he was convinced that he could follow in the footsteps of Aegon the Conqueror and Maegor the Cruel, and have more than one bride. While King Jaehaerys Targaryen's doctrine of exemptionalism formally allowed incestuous marriages for members of House Targaryen, arguing that they were more than just mortal men given their Valyrian traits and heritage, it did not go as far as to allow polygamy, especially given the damage the many marriages of King Maegor the Cruel did to the realm. There was also the issue for Daemon that he was not technically a member of House Targaryen, while his mother, Princess Daena, was a Targaryen, and his father was of course King Aegon IV. Being a bastard, Daemon was given the traditional bastard name of the Crown Lands, Waters. Even when he did go on to form House Blackfyre, and eventually becoming legitimized, he was still not a Targaryen, for which the doctrine of exemptionalism applies to. Even so, with the loss of power House Targaryen faced after the Dance of the Dragons, some even wondered if they would even be able to enforce the rights of the doctrine if the faith did object to it. The truth of the matter is that King Aegon, being the kind of man he was, might have even promised to indulge his bastard son in this regard, as some of the Blackfyre partisans later claimed was the case. But King Daeron II was not his father's son. He was of a different mind entirely. Not only did Daeron refuse to permit his brother more than one wife, but he also gave Daenerys' hand to Maron Martell as part of the bargain to finally unite the Seven Kingdoms with Dorne. Whether Daenerys loved Daemon, as those who rose for the Black Dragon later claimed, who can say? In the years afterwards, Daenerys was aught but a loyal wife to Prince Maron, and as she mourned Daemon Blackfyre, she left no record of it. During the early reign of King Daeron the Good, the king spent most of his time trying to right the wrongs of his father's misrule and bring stability to his realm. It was no easy task given the extent of the damage Aegon the Unworthy had caused, but King Daeron II had achieved a lot during this time and ensured his name would forever be remembered in the histories thanks to him finally bringing Dorne under the control of House Targaryen, where so many of his ancestors had failed. He had also managed to reorganize the court, with more competent councillors, had begun the long work of undoing his father's dangerous decrees. He ensured his father's last wishes of legitimization of his bastard children, and ensured the planned marriage of Daemon Blackfyre took place. There was a new peace over Westeros, and the future rule of King Daeron looked to be prosperous. However, much like many matters in the long rule of House Targaryen, even with all the seemingly good work, there would be a sting in the tail. The peaceful joining of Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms and the legitimization of the Great Bastards would be at the heart of these troubles. But even so, at the time, the realm had been stabilized, and King Daeron became known by the lords and small folk alike as Daeron the Good, a name that had stuck throughout the pages of history. Very much unlike his father, King Daeron II was an altogether different king and a different kind of man. His detractors would even use his distinct differences from King Aegon IV as support for their claim he was in fact the son of Aemon the Dragon Knight and not the unworthy king. But on the whole, by the lords and small folk, King Daeron II was widely seen as just and good-hearted. But like many matters when it comes to politics, it would never be enough. Dorne joining the Seven Kingdoms had made many lords in the Reach and Stormlands feel neglected and uncomfortable given the long history of bloodshed between them and the kingdom to the south, and with so many Dornishmen now at court, they felt displaced and feared how the power of these new Dornish courtiers could negatively impact their own kingdoms. Some even started to question the influence of the king's Dornish wife, Queen Maria Martell, whom was not only from Dorne, but the sister of the Prince of Dorne. In truth, history records very little of Queen Maria. From what we can tell of her, she never, at least openly, tried to influence Daeron's politics, and for the most part seemed to want to keep away from political matters altogether. But she did do her duty as queen, and provide the king with sons and heirs, which in turn caused more misgiving among some lords, who argued that the future king of Westeros would be half Dornish and thus would always have a preference to his mother's people rather than his other subjects. In turn, it would help fuel the bloody events that were to come. The issue of the Dornish influence is an interesting matter, with two very well-reasoned arguments. On the one hand, the fact there was more Dornish men at court, the queen being Dornish, and the king's sister being married to the Prince of Dorne, it is natural that the Dornish would now have more influence and power in Westeros. And over the course of the early reign of Daeron, it may have actually been a necessity to ensure a smooth transition of Dorne being an independent principality into joining the realm of House Targaryen, as in truth, it was never as simple as agreeing terms and making it so. It took time and hard negotiation, but it's vital to remember that among the lords of the Reach and Stormlands, who had spilled blood in defence of the kingdoms for thousands of years, and then for House Targaryen along the southern border with Dorne, worry and suspicion was always going to be inevitable. Perhaps there was some way Daeron could have mitigated these fears. One particularly sticky issue was the fact that House Martell was allowed to keep its title of Prince of Dorne, with many lords viewing that to mean they were above the other lords of Westeros. But in negotiations as complex as this, both parties have to relent in some aspects, so an agreeable deal can be struck. If not, there would be endless back and forth and no progress. Despite the messages it sent to the rest of his lords, King Daeron II may not have had much of a choice when it came to the matter if it was a non-negotiable issue for the Dornish. Despite it all, Daeron did achieve something that did seem impossible, and integration was never going to be easy or happen quickly, but over time these tensions would lessen and fade into memory. King Daeron himself was no warrior, with descriptions of him from this era noting that he was small of frame, with thin arms, round shoulders, and a scholarly disposition. He liked to spend his days reading and meeting with learned men and counsellors. Like any prince of House Targaryen, he'd been trained as a boy in the martial arts, but he never had a skill for it, and always seemed disinterested. Once he was a man grown, he showed no inclination of improving or honing his skill at arms further. But as history proves to us, not every king need to be a great warrior, and not every king need to be a scholarly man. While a mix of both is certainly good and a benefit, it does not wholly define the kind of king they are, and the quality of their reign. However, two of Daeron's 4 sons seemed all that he could have wished for in a knight, lord, or heir. Perhaps some of the finest warriors that had graced House Targaryen since Aegon's conquest all those years ago. The eldest, Prince Baelor, won the name Breakspear at the age of 17, following his famous victory at Princess Daenerys' wedding tourney. He defeated Daemon Blackfyre in the final tilt, and his youngest son, Prince Maekar, seemed like to show similar prowess at arms. Little could anyone have known at the time, but the sons of King Daeron the Good would all play a vital role in the history of Westeros, and have a huge influence on the events to come. Like most marriages in Westeros, while there is always a political element involved, and in some rare cases love, the need to marry normally has one key aim for all parties: the continuation of the family line and to provide strong and competent heirs to ensure the stability of the realm. While there certainly was a political motivation in King Daeron II Targaryen's marriage to Queen Maria Martell, forged in the wake of the Dornish betrayal of King Daeron I, the Young Dragon, at the end of the day, the goal was to further his line, even if at that point it didn't seem like the throne would ever pass to Daeron. In this, it's fair to say that Daeron and his Dornish queen succeeded, birthing some of the greatest princes House Targaryen had seen in generations. Once Daeron's grandfather had become heir to Baelor the Blessed, and during his own father's misrule, there was still some hope for the future of House Targaryen through Daeron's promising children. The king's eldest son, Prince Baelor Targaryen, known as Baelor Breakspear, was born in 170 AC. Unlike most members of House Targaryen, he did not have the traditional Targaryen look attributed to his mother being Dornish. Prince Baelor had the dark hair of his mother. We have no record of his eyes, but history tells us he looked unmistakably Dornish. He kept his dark hair cut short, and kept his jaw clean shaven. His nose had been broken twice, giving it a rugged look. As a warrior, Baelor seemed to be all you could have wished for in a knight, lord, or heir to the Iron Throne. He was a man who could win respect with ease, and he was open-handed and as just as his father, King Daeron II, and Baelor treated honourable foes with clemency. However, many men looked upon Baelor's dark hair and eyes, and muttered that he was much more Martell than Targaryen. Some Blackfyre sympathizers in the years to come were also bothered by his namesake, Baelor the Blessed, the feeblest king who'd ever sat the Iron Throne. When Prince Baelor became heir to the Iron Throne, he was later given the title of Prince of Dragonstone by his father at the death of King Aegon IV in 184 AC. In 187 AC, the 17-year-old Baelor won the name Breakspear following his famous victory at his aunt Daenerys' wedding tourney, where he defeated Sir Daemon Blackfyre in the final tilt of the tourney. Daeron's second son was born sometime between 172 and 177 AC. Unlike his elder brother Baelor, Aerys looked much more traditionally Targaryen. According to some sources, Aerys was spindly, with long straight hair. He had a long thin face and a long thin moustache. Later accounts would describe Aerys as a bookish man who preferred reading to politics and people. It is said across the Seven Kingdoms that Aerys would sooner bring a book to his bed rather than his wife. Aerys was very much interested in books about ancient prophecy and the higher mysteries, much to the scorn of the maesters at court. It is claimed that at some point, Aerys read a prophecy that spoke about the return of dragons. He was married to his cousin, Lady Eleanor Penrose. History does not remember how exactly Aerys and Eleanor were related, but it is known that Eleanor does not descend from Princess Aelena Targaryen and her husband, Lord Ronald Penrose. Aerys is said to have never shown any interest in his wife or getting her with child, instead shunning her bed altogether. According to the rumours, Aerys did not even consummate their marriage. Daeron's third son, Rhaegal, was born sometime between 173 and 178 AC. We do not know much about the look of Prince Rhaegal, but it is said by some he took more after the Dornish look than a Targaryen. From what little records we have of Prince Rhaegal's life, we do know that he was considered meek, mad and sickly. Apparently, during the reign of King Aerys I, it was widely believed by those at court, and even within the members of House Targaryen, that Rhaegal was crazy and mad, as he had been seen dancing naked throughout the Red Keep. Rhaegal was married to Lady Alice Arryn and had 3 children by her, the twins Aelor and Elora, and a daughter Daenora. He became Prince of Dragonstone in 209 AC, when his older brother Prince Aerys ascended to the Iron Throne. As Aerys had no children of his own, Rhaegal died in 215 AC, whilst choking on a lamprey pie. His son, Prince Aelor, the new Prince of Dragonstone, would not long outlive him. The fourth and final son of King Daeron II was Maekar Targaryen, born sometime between 174 and 179 AC. While the title of Prince of Dragonstone was given to each heir to the Iron Throne, Prince Maekar was the first to be given the Targaryen seat of Summerhall, and was thus known as the Prince of Summerhall. Maekar was said to be a capable army commander who served in 2 of the Blackfyre rebellions. Maekar was said to have been a powerfully built man who wore a beard, adding to his tough look. He bore many of the traditional Targaryen features, such as violet eyes, and his hair was such a pale blonde that it was almost white. Maekar had straight hair and a square-cut beard, both being the colour of silver and a hint of gold. He was a thickly built, powerful looking. However, pox marks scarred his cheeks. Maekar has been documented as being prickly and impatient, said to be a harsh man, quick to judge and condemn. Unlike his elder brother Baelor, he was not charismatic and could not make friends and allies easily. After Baelor's accidental death by his hand, Maekar became even more stern and unforgiving. Given his title as the Prince of Summerhall, Maekar had his own personal coat of arms, the 3-headed Targaryen dragon, quartered. Some suspect the quartering represented him being the 4th son. His armor was decorated with black curved dragon teeth along the shoulders and down his back, and the crest of his helm had dragon's teeth as well. He wielded a huge spiked mace. While King Daeron II was no warrior, it was noted that 2 of his sons, namely Baelor and Maekar, appeared to be all that could be wished of a knight, lord or heir. Baelor was a tourney champion at 17, and Maekar similarly matched his skills. As a 4th son, Maekar was not expected to rule, so he married young to Lady Diana Dane and had 4 sons and 2 daughters, Daeron, Aerion, Aemon, Daela, Aegon, and Rhae. While on the surface, the realm seemed to be stable, even with the issues the Dornish integration into the kingdom of House Targaryen had caused. Daeron had done much to right the wrongs of his father, and his marriage to Queen Moriah had produced 4 sons, who in turn had their own sons. It very much seemed the succession was more than secure. But bubbling under the surface, whispers and conspiracies were in reality running rampant among the lords of Westeros, and the divisions that caused the Blackfyre rebellions began to deepen, even if we can only see it through the lens of the knowledge of events to follow. But even in King Daeron II's eldest son, and seemingly strong heir Baelor Breakspear, the men who would go on to support House Blackfyre found issue. The concern of the power the Dornish now held over the Seven Kingdoms had created an air of tension among the lords of the Stormlands and Reach. In truth, to these lords, when looked upon Baelor Breakspear's dark hair and eyes, they muttered that he was more Martell than Targaryen. Even though he proved a man who could win respect with ease, and was as open-handed as his father, the issue of Baelor's Dornish heritage and remarkable lack of Targaryen features resulted in the knights and lords of the Dornish marches coming to mistrust Daeron, and thus by extension, Baelor as well. The divisions between the Marcher Lords and the Dornish only became more perilous, and it slowly began to look more and more like the old days of the Dornish wars and the thousands of years of bloodshed before Aegon had conquered Westeros, back to a time when the Dornishmen were the enemy to fight and defend the kingdom from, not the rivals for the king's attention, with one hand on the Iron Throne itself. Some even spoke of rumours that this had been the Dornish plan since the killing of King Daeron I in Dorne during his fell conquest, that the marriage of King Daeron II and the Prince of Dorne's sister in the aftermath of the war was always part of a larger Dornish conspiracy. Who were these disgruntled lords to turn to in order to right their perceived wrongs? They would look to Daemon Blackfyre. He had grown tall and powerful, half a god among mortal men, and with the Conqueror's own sword, Blackfyre, the sword of kings in his possession, given to him by none other than his father, King Aegon IV. Looking back now with the context of history and knowledge, King Aegon bestowing the ancient Valyrian steel sword upon Daemon can be considered as one of the seeds of the rebellion that had been planted before anyone was even aware of it, and these seeds took years to bear fruit, but when they did, it would bring fire and blood, blood and fire. And once again, the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros and its lords from the Wall to Dorne would tear itself apart anew. The peace brought in the wake of the Dance of the Dragons was now nothing but a smouldering ash and a fading memory left in dusty history books on the shelves of the libraries of the Citadel. It seemed like all the lessons learned had been forgotten. Much like the Dance of the Dragons, the Blackfyre Rebellion did not start overnight. It was a slow burn over many years until things exploded, suddenly and quickly. There was no final insult, no great wrong, that led Daemon Blackfyre to turn against his half-brother, King Daeron II. While many stated his love of Princess Daenerys, the idea in itself is inherently problematic, as if the Blackfyre rebellions were truly all for the love of Daenerys. How is it possible 80 years passed before the rebellion bloomed? That was a long time to harbour thwarted love, especially when Rowena Tyrosh had already given him 7 sons and daughters beside, and Daenerys had also borne Prince Maron several heirs. Some point to the claim that Daemon still hoped for a polygamous marriage with Daenerys, something he could only do as king. Regardless, 8 years is a long time to wait, but it is reasonable to deduce that if Daemon Blackfyre loved Princess Daenerys, it would certainly be a factor that would lead him down the path of rebellion, but perhaps not the primary reason. In truth, the seeds found fertile ground because of Aegon the Unworthy. Aegon had hated the Dornish and tried himself to war against them, and there was many lords who desired a return to those days of bloodshed. Despite Aegon's associated misrules, they would never be happy with this new, peaceable king in Daeron. Many famed warriors looked on with dismay at the peace in the realm and the Dornishmen in the king's court, and thus they began to seek Daemon Blackfyre out. Perhaps at first, Daemon Blackfyre merely indulged such talk for the sake of his vanity. After all, many years had passed between the first man approaching Daemon and the actual rebellion. What, then, tipped Daemon over the edge into proclaiming for the Iron Throne itself? While we can never know 100% for sure what happened exactly and the true honest reasons Daemon rose up, what we can say is that it seemed likely that it was another one of the great bastards, Aegor Rivers, known as Bitterstill, and his master-at-arms, Sir Quentyn Ball, who played a huge factor in convincing Daemon. Many have put forward it was perhaps Bitterstill's bracken blood that made Aegor so unpredictable and so quick to take offence. Perhaps it was the fall of the Brackens in King Aegon IV's esteem, leading to his own exile from court. Or perhaps it was only his rivalry with his half-brother and fellow bastard Brynden Rivers, who had been able to maintain his close relationships at court, as Bloodraven's mother had been well loved during her life and was fondly remembered. So the Blackwoods did not suffer as the Brackens did when the king cast off his respective mistresses, thus deepening the historic hatred between the houses even further. There are even rumours that perhaps Brynden and Aegon Rivers quarrelled over the love of their half-sister, Shiera Seastar. Whatever the case may be, Aegon Rivers soon began to publicly press Daemon Blackfyre to proclaim for the throne, and all the more so after Daemon agreed to wed his eldest daughter, Calla, to Aegon. The history books remark the following: "Bitter his steel may have been, but worse was his tongue. He spilled poison in Daemon's ear, and with it came the clamouring of the other knights and lords with their grievances against King Daeron II, citing many reasons for their support. But it came down to two most common among them. While many would cite the Dornish influence as the reason for their support, many also began to recall the rumours that King Daeron was not truly the son of Aegon IV, but rather his brother, Aemon the Dragon Knight. For many, Daemon being a legitimised bastard seemed like the obvious solution to the problem. The growing power of the Dornish and the unrest it caused in the southern kingdoms and along the Dornish marches, the influence of men such as Sir Quentyn Ball and Aegon Rivers, rumoured discontent at Daenerys' marriage to Prince Morian Martell, the rumours of the bastardy of King Daeron, and the fact that King Aegon IV had legitimised Daemon and given him the Sword of Kings, it all equated to, and it all led to one inevitable outcome. In the end, years of such talk bore their fruit, and Daemon Blackfyre made his decision, and with it, the first Blackfyre rebellion began. In the year 196 AC, after years of pressure from the likes of Aegon Rivers and disgruntled lords up and down Westeros, unhappy with the rule of King Daeron II, in particular those who felt the Dornish had been given too much power in the wake of them joining the Seven Kingdoms, Daemon Blackfyre had made his decision. He would challenge his half-brother, the king, for the Iron Throne, but Daemon, or some who supported him, must have acted too rashly, for word soon reached King Daeron that Daemon Blackfyre meant to declare himself king within the turn of the moon. Ultimately, we do not know how word came to Daeron, though the unfinished tome, The Red Dragon and the Black, suggests that another of the great bastards, Brynden Rivers, was involved in some way. If he was in fact the source of the information, or simply told of it via a third party, we cannot say. King Daeron sent the Kingsguard to arrest Daemon before he could take his plans for treason any further than that plans. We do not know how, but Daemon was forewarned of his coming arrest and made plans to make his escape. However, given the now perilous position he found himself in, with his plans now known, he could not do it alone. But those loyal to Daemon were more than ready to assist their chosen king, with the help of the famously hot-tempered knight and his former master-at-arms, Sir Quentyn Ball. Known to the pages of history as Fireball, Daemon was able to escape the Red Keep safely via secret means that remain unknown to us even to this day. As knowledge of Daemon's plan to overthrow the king was not yet known widely among the lords and small folk alike, gave the rebels a chance to dictate the narrative of events somewhat in their favour, or so that was the intent. Thus, Daemon Blackfyre's allies used this attempted arrest as a cause for war, claiming that King Daeron had acted against Daemon out of no more than baseless fear and unverified rumours from untrustworthy sources. And thus, like with many conflicts before and after, the war of words and politics had begun, with supporters on both sides trying to justify their positions to make themselves seem the wrong and attacked party, whilst trying to rally undecided allies to their cause. When you take a look back through history, wars will follow the same pattern. From Aegon's conquest to the Dance of the Dragons, and now the Blackfyre Rebellion, they all followed the same pattern before the conflict inevitably turned bloody. It was now the long-standing rumours surrounding the parentage of King Daeron began to resurface in earnest. The supporters of Daemon Blackfyre gave the king the mocking title of Daeron Falseborn, thus repeating the claims that Aegon the Unworthy himself was said to have circulated in the later years of his reign, that he had been sired not by the king, but by his brother, Aemon the Dragon Knight. Was there truth to these rumours? We can never know. There is no real proof that favours them, nor proof that disproves them. But even so, those on both sides of the argument firmly became entrenched in their position, and in this manner did the first Blackfyre rebellion begin. In the year 196 AC, Daemon reversed the colours of the traditional Targaryen arms to show a black dragon on a red field. The rebels declared for Princess Daenerys' bastard son, Daemon Blackfyre, first of his name, proclaiming him the eldest true son of King Aegon IV, and that his half-brother, Daeron the Bastard. Subsequently, many battles were fought between the Black and the Red Dragons in the Vale, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, and further afield. Before fighting began, however, clear sides in this conflict formed and grew larger by the day. It has later been said that half the realm declared for Daemon Blackfyre, the other half for King Daeron, though the truth is this may be an exaggeration on both parts, as none of the great houses did pledge their support to House Blackfyre, and even among the houses who did pledge their support, not necessarily the full houses did, and even when they did, they passively backed aside. Conversely, King Daeron did also have the backing of many minor houses, but also several of the great houses, such as House Arryn, Tyrell, Tully and Martell. Most notably of the other houses, records show that House Hightower, Butterwell, Oakhart and Tarback gave support to both Daemon and Daeron, while others, such as House Manfred and Lothston, were willing to betray Daemon for Daeron. For Daemon and House Blackfyre, most of their core supporters were concentrated in the Reach and in the Stormlands, with some further afield, but those two kingdoms made up most of Daemon's strength. They were primarily made up of houses among the Border Lords, with strong anti-Martell sentiment, who resented the new peace deal with Dorne, thus their support was going to be strongly in favour of Daemon. At some point during the conflict, Daemon did manage to openly control enough territory that at some point he began minting his own coinage. However, many scholars have noted such coinage in truth held little value, and at this point it was more of an act of propaganda, as for many lords and small folk, seeing the likeness of Daemon Blackfyre on coinage gave him more of a sense of legitimacy. We also know that at some point a thief attempted to steal dragon eggs for Daemon, another symbol of Targaryen legitimacy. No matter if Daemon could go on to hatch the egg or not, the possession of them added to Daemon's cause, but ultimately the thief was caught and the plan fell apart. The war, much like the countless before it, would be a bloody one for both sides. Over its course, battles were fought between the rebels and loyalists, amongst other places. The Vale, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, the Reach. Sir Quentyn Ball attacked the Westerlands, killing Lord Lefford at the gates of Lannisport, and then defeating Daemon Lannister in turn. At the crossing of the Mander, Sir Quentyn slew all of Lady Penrose's sons, except for the youngest, who he spared as a favour to the lady. Lord Leo Tyrell participated in the first Blackfyre rebellion as well, fighting on behalf of House Targaryen and Daeron. He won notable victories in the Reach against Daemon's supporters. During a period where it seemed as if Daemon Blackfyre was prevailing, King Daeron II came to consider his Hand of the King, Lord Ambrose Butterwell, to be ineffectual, and in the end, Butterwell's loyalty was questioned, with him being suspected of being a secret supporter of Daemon. Shortly after, Butterwell was replaced by Lord Hayford, a noted loyalist, on the eve of the Battle of the Redgrass Field, the key and final battle in the rebellion. The key Blackfyre general Quentyn Ball was slain in a chance encounter, picked off by a random archer when he stopped for a drink of water. Meanwhile, Lord Bracken had gone across the narrow sea to hire sellswords to reinforce the Blackfyres, but storms delayed his return and the merest crossbowmen he had hired. Going into the final battle of the war, there was much at stake for both sides. Either could walk away with victory. The Battle of the Redgrass Field would change the fate of Westeros, House Blackfyre, and Targaryen forever. While the first Blackfyre rebellion was of course a bloody affair, filled with battles big and small, the balance of power shifting after each, but in the end it would all come down to a single battle, and one that would shape the future of Westeros, and define not just House Targaryen and Blackfyre, but houses great and small for the next century. The first Blackfyre rebellion ended at the Redgrass Field, nigh on 1 year after the onset of the war. Some scholars have written of the boldness and bravery of the men who fought alongside Daemon Blackfyre, while others of their treason against their true king, Daeron II. But the truth of the matter is, for all the valour in the field of battle and their enmity against King Daeron, their cause was lost. The two armies collided on an unnamed field. For the Black Dragons, Lord Costane was on the left of Daemon's host, while Lord Tourney was on the right, with Aegor Rivers, who was known as Bitterstill. Lord Leo Tyrell, one of Daeron's most powerful and influential supporters, did not arrive in time for this decisive battle. Historical records and tales of the many present at the battle state that Daemon was unstoppable that day, first cutting Lord Donald Arryn's vanguard to pieces, slaying Will Waynwood and the Knight of Ninestar, before coming upon Sir Gawain Corbray of the Kingsguard. A famous fight took place between the two, with Valyrian steel swords, with Daemon wielding Blackfyre, the Sword of Kings, and Gawain using the famous Lady Forlorn. Daemon managed to severely injure his opponent, leaving him blind and bleeding, but Daemon paused to make sure no more injury came to Sir Gawain, ordering Red Tusk to carry Gawain back to the maester in the rear. By that time, Daemon's half-brother, Brynden Rivers, known as Bloodraven, and his private guard, the Raven's Teeth, crested the Weeping Ridge, gaining the high ground from where he showered Daemon's position with arrows. Bloodraven had spotted Daemon's banner and slew the elder of Daemon's twin sons, Aegon. Knowing that Daemon would never leave his son on the field, he then pierced Daemon with 7 arrows, the last killing him. The younger twin, Aemon, picked up the Sword of Kings, Blackfyre, when his father fell. Despite the boy's bravery trying to fight on, he too was slain by Brynden Rivers. In many battles, the death of your general, your chosen king, will cause your ranks to rout. But this was not the case with the devout supporters of Daemon Blackfyre. His death was followed by Aegor Rivers, Bitterstill, his half-brother, and his mad charge, with the Sword of Kings Blackfyre firm in hand, as he attempted to rally Daemon's forces. Bitterstill met with Bloodraven, his long-term rival, in the midst of the charge, and a mighty duel of legend ensued. Men who witnessed it spoke of the ferocity of the duel. It ultimately left Bloodraven blinded in one eye and sent Aegor Rivers fleeing, still with Blackfyre in hand. But the battle came to an end when Prince Baelor Breakspear appeared with a host of Stormlanders and Dornishmen, men from 2 regions of Westeros who for the last 1,000 years had been on opposite sides of the battlefield, now on the same. Allied with each other, they fell on the rebels from the rear, causing massive damage, while the young Prince Maekar Targaryen rallied what remained of Lord Arryn's vanguard and made an impactable anvil against which the rebels were hammered and destroyed. A Lord Tourney died from his wounds, while Lord Ambrose Butterwell lost 2 sons who fought on opposite sides of the rebellion. Sir Buford Bulwer allegedly killed 40 men during the battle. Only some of the numerous tales and legends from the Battle of the Red Grass Field to mark the pages of history books and in the songs of singers. It is suggested that the Red Grass Field was actually quite a close affair, and if Daemon had not stopped to ensure Sir Gawain was sent to a maester, he might have broken Maekar's left before Bloodraven had managed to gain the ridge, and before Baelor Breakspear arrived. Then, with Bloodraven slain and the road to King's Landing open, Daemon would have had little opposition, and we may very well now have a Blackfyre king. With that, the Battle of the Red Grass Field and the First Blackfyre Rebellion came to its bloody end. Depending on your point of view, and if you supported the Black Dragons or the Red, an estimated 10,000 men had died in Daemon Blackfyre's attempt to overthrow his brother and claim the Iron Throne. But while 10,000 died, many more were wounded and maimed, and that does not include the countless small folk who also lost their lives, caught in the middle of the conflict. King Daeron, at the start of his reign, had worked to keep the peace Baelor the Blessed had forged. It had been shattered, though arguably through no fault of his own, save perhaps too much mercy for his half-brother, with some critics of the king believing Daeron could have done more sooner to prevent Daemon from rebelling, as warning signs were present for many years. In the aftermath, King Daeron showed a sternness that few expected, with many even close to him who felt it was beyond his personality. Many lords and knights who had supported the Black Dragons of Daemon Blackfyre had lands and seats and their privileges stripped from them, and were forced to give over hostages. Daeron felt that he had trusted them, and that trust was now broken, and could never return. He had done all he could to rule justly, and still they turned against him. Daemon Blackfyre's surviving sons, Daemon, Aegon, and Aenys, fled Westeros to Tyrosh, their mother's homeland, and with them went Daemon Blackfyre's most loyal and fierce supporter, Aegor Rivers, Bitterstill, who would go on to form the famous Southsword Company, the Golden Company. But Bitterstill would remain a thorn in the side of House Targaryen for years to come, as the realm would continue to be troubled by the claims of Blackfyre claimants to the Iron Throne for more than 4 generations. With his bastard half-brother Daemon dead, and the Blackfyre rebellion firmly dealt with, at least for now, King Daeron II Targaryen resumed his reign and his work of uniting Westeros as one kingdom by integrating the Dornish into the realm. For some, the assistance of the Dornish in putting down the rebellion helped win them favour within the Lords of Westeros, but for those who marched with Daemon Blackfyre, that resentment would linger for generations. While House Targaryen had won the war firmly, and the supporters of Daemon had been punished, the divide the rebellion caused among the Lords of Westeros would leave scars that would never fade, even to the end of the Targaryen rule of Westeros and the rise of House Baratheon. But in the short term, King Daeron II would begin to repair Westeros with his sons and heirs supporting him. In fact, many thought that King Daeron had now ensured that the realm would be under Targaryen rule for centuries to come, as the line of succession was clear, with his sons mostly proving to be the kind of princes any king would want to follow them. Not since the time of Aegon III had the succession seemed so secure. Baelor Breakspear was a strong heir, and he himself had 2 sons of his own, in Valar and Meadow Targaryen. But as followers of history rightly know, even the most secure situations can have a sting in the tail. But few could have doubted that Baelor Breakspear would be a great knight, for he was the heart of chivalry and the soul of wisdom, and came to serve his father most ably as Hand of the King. In a lot of ways, his non-traditional Targaryen look would do much to bring Dorne and House Martell closer with the wider realm of Westeros, but no man could know the will of the gods. Sadly for King Daeron and the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, the promising future rule of Baelor was never to be, as Baelor Breakspear, the eldest son of the king, the Prince of Dragonstone and Hand of the King, was cut down in his prime. The death of the prince was a shock for House Targaryen for sure, but what made the situation worse is the cause of Baelor's death was in fact his own brother, Prince Maekar. While Baelor's death was indeed accidental, the events that caused it would become a tale of legend and song, and mean that Ashford would forever be remembered as a place that the fate of Westeros and House Targaryen would change forever and travel down a very different path than any could have predicted. If one word could sum up the events, it would have been unlikely. Baelor Breakspear died in the Tourney at Ashford Meadow in the year 209 AC. It was not the tilt, or the melee as you would expect an accidental death to occur, but in a trial of 7, the first in a century, in which Baelor fought on behalf of a lowly hedge knight of no parentage of note, a complete unknown, who was attending his first tourney as a knight in his own right. Baelor's death was a mishap, almost certainly, as it was written that Prince Maekar always bitterly regretted Baelor's passing and marked his anniversary every year. Yet Baelor died, and doubtless Maekar and the realm wondered if one hedge knight was worth the loss of the Prince of Dragonstone and the Hand of the King. But then, they did not know how high that very hedge knight would rise, and the role that Sir Duncan the Tall would play in the future of House Targaryen and Westeros. In fact, without that lowly hedge knight, and his valour in the years to come, the current state of Westeros would not be possible. As we have discussed, Baelor Breakspear had 2 sons, the young Prince Valar and Meadow, and so too did Maekar, and the king had 2 other sons beside, though the realm was less certain about Aerys, a bookish man obsessed with arcane matters, and Rhaegal, a sweet boy supposedly touched by madness. As things stood, Valar was next in line for the throne, followed by his younger brother. Should anything happen to the princes, the childless Prince Aerys would inherit the throne instead. Failing that, the questionable Prince Rhaegal and his young twin sons. Lastly, we would have Prince Maekar, whom too had many sons of his own. However, for the crown to fall that far would need an extremely unlikely series of events, given how far down the line of succession Maekar and his sons were. But sometimes the most unlikely events are the ones that pass, as in 209 AC, the Great Spring Sickness swept the 7 kingdoms, affecting all save the Vale and Dorne, where they closed the ports and mountain passes. Worst hit of all was King's Landing. The High Septon, the 7th voice on earth, died, as did a third of the most devout, and nearly all of the Silent Sisters residing in the city. Corpses were piled up in the ruins of the Dragon Pit, till they stood 10 feet high, and in the end, Brendan Rivers, Bloodraven, who by the year 209 was acting as hand of the king, had the pyromancers burn the corpses where they lay, as there were too many to bury. A quarter of the city went up in flames along with them, but there was nothing else to be done. Worse still, the sons of Baelor Breakspear were amongst those carried away, as was King Daeron II himself. He had reigned for 25 years, and most of those years saw peace and plenty for the realm. He had brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms, put down the Blackfyre rebellion, and repaired much of the damage caused by the misrule of his father, King Aegon IV. With Baelor Breakspear and his sons dead, the throne would pass to his next eldest son, the childless Prince Aerys, now King Aerys I Targaryen. And so came to pass the first in a series of unlikely events that would change Westeros and House Targaryen forever.